How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hello, everybody. We hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask the question, is it better than Citizen Kane?
As always, if you like Citizen Kane, that's fine, because we're not here to hate on it.
But when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
So, come down from that monument. Put down your boxing gloves and your bottle of alcohol, and listen close, because today we're discussing Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, 1931.
Lovely. Very nice.
Put in the work today, Parker.
Putting in the work today. That was a good one.
Dropped the ball one too many times.
No, that was wonderful.
Well,
very happy with that.
Like,
very,
once
very
again,
good.
silent films, not really quotes that I can reference.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I tried to figure out a way to fit in, like, you can see now? Yes, I can see now. I couldn't.
Yeah, we're not really a visual medium, so... You can hear now? No. Doesn't really
So
read.
every time I say it, I'm making it sound like the Rise of Skywalker quote. You can see now.
You can see now.
I can see now.
I can see now. I think that'd be a better ending to the movie. This movie that has maybe a perfect ending could have been,
Could have been improved by our stupid ass meme reference. Just yeah, really good. Any film buffs out there are just so happy the way we decide to talk about classic cinema.
I'm sure they're stoked. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, everybody.
Glad you're all here. And as Max so eloquently put it, we are looking at Charlie Chaplin's City of Lights, which I'm excited about. Max, you'd never seen this movie before.
I hadn't seen this before. I'd seen other Chaplin stuff. Other Chaplin joints, if you will.
That's
what he says. That's what shows up in the title before every movie. Is
is that where Spike Lee got it?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
I don't think that's a good joke to make. Anyway. The joke is Charlie Chaplin calling his movies a joint.
Yes.
There's nothing... Okay. Anyway. Just explaining that for anybody out there. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I'd seen Modern Times, and I'd seen, Shoulder Arms, and...
Sure.
And the Immigrant, I think that's one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen, like, a lot of those.
Okay.
But I hadn't really seen this. I hadn't seen this before. And I liked it.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. I was curious to know, because I... similarly, like I definitely haven't seen all of Chaplin's work. Yeah. I think that's a tall order to watch everything the guy ever made. But I have seen most of like his features, at least, like, Modern Times, Gold Rush, Great Dictator.
The Great Dictator, which I haven't seen yet, but I really
Limelight. Great Dictator is really good. It was a split for me. I was thinking about that while we were watching this, because I like City Lights a lot.
Yeah.
And The Great Dictator is also really good. And it really was when I was suggesting picks for the lineup. Like, those were the two. I was like, I'd like to get a Chaplin in there, and I don't know which one to do. So we'll do Great Dictator.
I think you chose a good one with City Lights.
Oh, good.
Because I was looking, and again, who knows what the sources are on this? But I was looking at it, and here is a list of every director who has said it's their favorite film. Stanley Kubrick. Andrei Tarkovsky. It's one of Guillermo del Toro's personal favorite films, and at one time Orson Welles said it was his favorite film.
We got the crossover, ladies and gentlemen. We got it.
That's the Kane connection. Oh my God.
There's the Kane connection. That's
that 80s 90s sequel to Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
That
connection
franchise.
with a K too.
Right.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really cool. 1993.
Really cool.
Yeah. I love that's my favorite bit, is to just come up with really bad Citizen Kane sequels in every decade. Yeah. Maybe we'll do a special episode, like a bonus sometime.
Just to riff on that.
Just riff on that.
That sounds like a good time.
Anyway, yeah.
That's wild.
That's
I did not know. Yeah, that's crazy.
Like 3 of the greatest, and you know what, Guillermo too. I'm not trying to be mean, but like 3 of the greatest directors of all time, widely considered the greatest directors of all time, have said this is their favorite film.
Right, and that's why I ended up landing on this one, is because, like, aside from just having a personal preference for it a lot, it's in, like, a lot of Chaplin scholars consider this, like, this is the magnum opus. This is, like, the best one, which I think I agree with. I think there's good things in all of them, but, like, what I like about this one, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in the episode as we get into things, but, like, it's a nice transitionary period for Chaplin.
Right, because this came out post Sound. Like there
Yeah,
was pressure to make this a talkie, right?
Yeah,
He
so
thought it was a fad, so he was like, no.
exactly. The jazz singer comes out in 1927, which is 4 years before this, and immediately everybody is demanding sound. And Chaplin was very, very nervous about that because he had built this entire on-screen presence as the Tramp around pantomime, and like he had, honed his skill in that style in, vaudeville and British theater, which is all very pantomime. And so he's very nervous about making that jump to sound. And this movie is his last silent film.
Right.
And even then, it's kind of a hybrid. Like there is no sync dialogue, but there is sync sound.
Yeah, and like the orchestration, like little. I really liked the touch of like the horns being people's voices.
I do. I like that.
That's a fun little bit.
Yeah.
Like
I tried finding it. I couldn't find confirmation anywhere, but I would be interested to know if there's any sort of direct link between that gag and the Peanuts adults later on.
That's a good
I tried doing some research on it. I couldn't find anything concrete like connecting the two, but that was just immediately what I thought of. Let's do a thesis.
Do a research paper.
My hypothesis is...
That's how you have to talk when you're doing a thesis.
I think so.
That's why I didn't go to grad school.
Yeah, that was into my entire thesis defense.
That was the insufferable part of that. That's
exactly.
Like, well, my hypothesis. Cinema is.
Well, cinema. I believe that cinema is.
And ain't that enough?
Ain't that enough? Good night, ladies and
gentlemen.
gentlemen.
Cinema is. Anyway, okay. So, City, let's talk about your history with the film. I had seen it before. I watched it and I liked it. What's your history?
Yeah. So my history is, again, I keep coming back to this same old antiquated
I keep making fun of you for it. It's cool.
You can make fun of it. It's worth making fun of. I could have been making Friends, and instead I was doing this.
And now you're making movies.
And now I'm making movies.
So it paid off.
But same old story you've all heard a million times now. I checked out a lot of movies from my local library when I was like 12 and 13. I had moved to Idaho. Didn't have many friends, was having a hard time fitting in. And so I was already naturally a very introverted person, but just kind of leaned into that a lot. And movies became a good outlet for that because I already had an interest in them. And I was like, okay, well, I've got a lot of free time on my hands and the library has this amazing collection of DVDs. And so I'm just going to watch stuff. And I don't remember the first time I clocked who Charlie Chaplin was. I'm sure it was very early because I don't remember a time where I didn't know what he looked like.
Yeah.
Even if I'd never seen anything, I was like, oh yeah, the guy with the top, the bowler hat and the mustache.
It feels like one of those I don't know, genetic memories or something. You know how,
exactly.
There's certain classical pieces that it feels like you just know from day one when you're born.
Totally.
And Chaplin, similarly, I don't know when I would have first known who Charlie Chaplin was, or at least known what. I'm sure there are people, especially as the generations go on. I'm sure there are people who are maybe they aren't aware, but they've seen him.
Right. He's his iconography seems to be everywhere, which is kind of that's kind of the key difference to me between him and Buster Keaton. Personally,
sure. Yeah.
I think I like Keaton's stuff a little bit better. I think I like his gags and his physicality a lot, but it's really hard to deny just the iconography that Chaplin presents as a character. Buster Keaton has a look to him the way that a lot of actors have a look to them, but Chaplin created a character and an icon of in a few brush strokes. Yeah, you can get the idea of, oh yeah, that's that guy.
Yeah, it's a hat and a mustache.
Right.
And you can add other things there, but really that's all you need.
Really, exactly. Yeah. And so I don't know the first time I got introduced to the idea of Chaplin, but I'd never seen any of his stuff intentionally. Again, probably saw clips. I'm sure again, at the same time I'm watching lots of behind the scenes documentaries about film history. I'm sure I saw clips of stuff there too.
Yeah.
Distinctly I remember in the Gold Rush, the roll dance that he does.
Yes.
I remember I'd seen ages before, long before I ever watched the movie proper. I'd seen that clip, and I feel like there's a lot of those, a lot of these bits.
Well, I even feel like some of the boxing scene in this I'd seen before.
Yeah,
or like him in
yeah.
the, him in kind of the locker room area. Like I feel like I'd seen that image in some sort of montage before.
Totally, yeah. So
You
like
know?
I'm sure I'd had an exposure to him at some point, but around this time was the first time I was like, well, I want to check this out, and I don't know which one I watched first, because what they had was the library had these box sets
Right,
that were
yeah.
produced by like MK2 or something like that.
Yeah, that's the DVD I watched.
Yeah,
from
yeah,
that
yeah.
box
So
set.
it's like the stark white cover with
Yep.
like Chaplin separated from the background. It's just the figure and then like colored text, and
Yep.
each one is like a different color.
Yeah, if I hadn't already returned it, I would hold it up. But
Oh yeah, no, you're good. But so I think I just grabbed a few of those and realized I think they had them separated, but like looking at the covers, like, oh, these go together. I'm guessing the first one I watched was either Modern Times or this.
Yeah.
I didn't get to Great Dictator until later. I know that much. But
Yeah.
anyway, at some point, I started watching Chaplin movies, and I really enjoyed them quite
Yeah.
a bit. Like they were just very accessible to me, and I really liked, especially because at this time I was on like a Disney animation kick and just animation history in general, and so much of Chaplin is cartoon and live action form.
Yeah.
Like there's so much of that.
Oh, yeah.
And so I really gravitated to watching through his stuff, which then basically opened up the silent era to me. From there, I discovered Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd, and I just kind of branched out from there. But Chaplin was the end point for me.
Yeah.
And somewhere in that time frame, I watched this movie for the first time and really loved it because I'm sappy and sentimental and a romantic at heart, and this movie is just aching. It's just really lovely.
Yeah, it is. Did that sound loaded?
That sounded very loaded, actually.
It is. It's really lovely. But I think in the same way that watching Casablanca, I was like, yeah, this is really great.
Uh-huh.
But I wasn't connecting with it in the same way that I think you were.
Are you telling me that once again Max Bennion is having a hard time connecting with the grand romantic films of our time?
Not even from our time. I don't know what's wrong with me, Parker. I'm not even in like a really bad place with love or anything. I just which
That's
sucks.
because it's Casablanca, it's Brief Encounter, it's A Matter of Life and Death.
And kind of It's a Wonderful Life as well.
Kind of It's a Wonderful Life last year.
Although there was other stuff going on. I don't know.
The track records.
Something's
at least
wrong.
You're consistent, man.
Something's wrong.
Look.
Which is so weird because I feel like in high school I was like, I'm a romantic. I'm a sentimentalist. I grew up.
You grew up.
I grew up, Parker.
You got
I grew up. No, it's a really lovely film that I was like 4 stars.
Sure.
When I think for a lot of other people, obviously it's 5, 4.5.
I think I gave it 4.5.
Yeah, you did. Oh, I saw. But we didn't get a chance to talk about this since we
No, we
watched
didn't.
it.
This is all fresh.
We didn't talk about it, so it's all new.
All new.
How about you give the breakdown of City Lights?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. Well, first, do you want to say anything about your history with Chaplin? I know this film is new, but you touched on it briefly. Anything to add?
I didn't see anything until college.
Gotcha.
I always meant to, but I never did because in high school I was that guy that was like, yeah, I like movies, and then I didn't really watch any like film history. I didn't like start actively watching films as like an activity and as something that I like genuinely was like putting time and effort into and like finding ones that I wanted to watch, finding ones that people recommended. I didn't start doing that until like 2020, like 2019, 2020. So
I see.
Before that I was just like, I like movies, but really that just meant like I like seeing some indie films and I like watching blockbusters, and that was really
That makes sense.
But yeah, so I hadn't seen Chaplin until college, and then the first one I saw was Modern Times.
Nice.
And Modern Times is really great.
It is.
I like
It's very good.
and this is also very good. And his shorts that I saw are very good. Yeah, that's it. That's
Nice.
That's my history with Chaplin.
Cool.
I think he's one, again, like we were just talking about, just kind of wrapping up that thought of like, I think another thing is like, even if you haven't seen Chaplin before, you've seen references to his bits. Like, I think I saw the roll dance replicated in cartoons and in sitcoms. And, like, maybe another movie, like, well before
Benny and June does it.
Yes, that's exactly the movie I was
Benny
thinking
and
of.
June does it.
Yeah, wow. Nice pull.
Thanks.
Nice pull. Anyway, so, like, I'd seen references to it before.
Sure.
And I'd be like, what's that? What's funny about that? And my dad was like, oh, it's a Chaplin gag. And I'd go, oh. And then I didn't see Modern Times until I was 20. But yeah, so that's my history with Chaplin.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing.
Oh, thank you for asking.
Of course. So on to City Lights. So the film opens with a ceremony of sorts going on in the city, what we can guess is New York. And you've got this big pomp and circumstance of the unveiling of this statue. And again, keeping in context, like, the historical place of where this film is sitting in film history, like, it's a very tongue-in-cheek thing that, like, the opening scene, people open their mouths to speak and sound comes out, but it's not dialogue. Like, it feels very, like, wink at the audience, ribbing from Chaplin of being like, I know you all want me to do a talkie, but it's not this one. Yeah. But here's, like, this is my cheat. Like, technically it is sync sound.
Yeah. Well, and also he was really nervous about it too. He was nervous about it, and also, like, I don't know. Yeah.
So he was really resistant to it, but, like, that's kind of his compromise. And it's the first thing he puts out there. It's like, okay, we're going to have people that sound like kazoos when they talk.
Well, and the title card calls it a pantomime film, just so that people knew what they were going into.
Right. It really establishes that up front.
They're not expecting it to be a talkie. So
right.
That followed by this is like, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got all these dignitaries from the city talking about the statue, and they unveil it. And as soon as the tarp comes off, you see Chaplin as the Tramp just nestled in for a little nap on the lap of one of the statues. And everybody's very incensed by this because it's supposed to have meaning and importance. And he is just, a little street urchin, essentially. And they're like, get down from there. And they're upset. And he's immediately like, what I find so interesting about this, and I do think, now that I'm thinking back on this probably was the first one I watched, because I remember thinking how good of a job it does introducing the character of the Tramp to first-time viewers. Because at this point, the Tramp character is established through several other films, but it still treats this like an introduction. Like, we still get to know his character in the next minute, just by the way he responds to things of like, oh, he's sleeping on the statue. He is, he's...
stops to tie his shoe. He sits
exactly.
on the face.
He keeps tipping his hat to people, apologizing. He's very, like, he is bumbling without realizing. He gets his pants stuck on the sword of the statue.
Good physical gags.
Gags.
Like, really just had me laughing out loud from the beginning.
There was one this time that I don't think I had registered as a gag before, and I don't know why. I think I was just either too young or just hadn't connected or whatever. But, like, at the very end of that sequence, he, like, walks to the other side of the statue, and one of them is, like, holding their hand up. And he, like, leans forward as he's talking to somebody, and it's that with the thumb under the nose.
Thumb under the nose and the fingers in front of your face. Yeah.
So there's just lots of good little bits, and that whole thing is, like, a minute long. But we get introduced our character. We establish, okay, this is his place in the world. People don't like him very much, but he is not malicious. Like, he's not, like, anti-establishment or anything. He's just a little guy trying to make his way.
Little guy.
And so he hops the fence and gets away from the police and all of that. And we track him through the city, and there's a traffic jam, and he sees a cop on a motorcycle in front of him, and he doesn't want the cop to see him. And so he ducks through a parked car, which is a very fancy car, and he comes out the other side and he shuts the door. And there is a flower girl sitting on the corner right by the car, and she says, oh, would you like to buy a flower, sir, or whatever. And it's very interesting that, like, even then, the other thing that we learn about this Tramp character is that he likes to sort of put on the import of being a gentleman, even if he isn't. Like, he's still in very raggedy clothes, but, like, when this girl starts talking to him, he kind of, like, straightens up, and he's like, oh, well, and he keeps, like, he's trying to pick a flower, but she isn't really responding, and then at a certain point, she drops one, and he goes to pick it up, and she leans down and is searching for it. And she's like, did you pick it up, sir? And he looks kind of smug for a minute. He's like, it's right here. He's like pointing at it. And this is what I love about this movie and about Chaplin, especially, is there's such subtlety for silent film acting, which is kind of wild because so much of this is broad stroke pantomime, like really theatrical. But throughout this film, there's so many moments of like nuance. And this first bit is one of my favorites where he like looks down at her like incredulously and he's like pointing at the flower. And then it clocks for him that she's blind. And instantly his demeanor shifts. And he's suddenly so much more gentle and so much more like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, and it's really beautiful acting work from Chaplin, I think.
Yeah.
It's really great. But what happens is really fantastic, like visual storytelling of as he's trying to help her, he gives her the flower back. And just then a very well-dressed rich gentleman comes and gets into the waiting car and the car pulls away. And she says, wait, sir, your change.
Yeah.
And just by that one action, all of like the dramatic tension of the story is set up that this blind flower girl thinks he is a rich man because she heard him come out of a fancy car, heard the car pull away and assumed that he left.
Yeah.
And the tramp instantly, like he stays quiet and he like tiptoes away as to not like reveal himself still there.
Right.
And I just think it's really ingenious storytelling. Like it's very ergonomic and very like brisk and like, okay, you understand the conflict, you understand the miscommunication.
Yeah.
And that sets up everything else.
Well, it reminds me of that thought that I was reading this a month or two ago of someone arguing that like sound being introduced to film for some people at the time, and also some people are still kind of like, in a lot of ways, film doesn't need sound in a lot of ways. Film is a visual medium.
Totally.
You know, you don't need dialogue. You don't need that. And there's a question of, well, did sound make films less artistic and less ergonomic in that way? Like, is filmmaking with sound inherently worse than silent film? And I don't think that's true, but I think it raises an interesting point of like, watching silent films, it's incredible visual language. It's incredible like storytelling just from a visual perspective. Like you don't have the opportunity to use sound in the way that other films after that point do, right? And so I think that City Lights is a great example of that, of like, this is an incredible film, and also, that's what we talked about with Metropolis too, of like, look at what they are still capable of achieving without sound, even though nowadays people are like, silent film, that's like, what is that? That's half a thing. It's like, it's not half a thing. Film itself is its own art.
Totally.
Sound being added to it. Anyways, I just wanted to like bring that up because I think your point kind of is to that of like, like this is great storytelling and it's kind of film at maybe its purest.
I think so.
There's right?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I think there's some really great examples of that going on here. So we have that scene with the flower girl and ends on all of these end on like a comedic button, and she's like washing out her basin and doesn't know that he's there and tosses all the water in his face. And he like very quietly tries to tiptoe away as he's sopping wet so that she doesn't know. And then later that evening, we cut to, it's so straight. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense. But like for some reason, my like 12-year-old brain, this next scene, something about the set design always read as a rooftop, which doesn't make sense because it's water. Yeah. Like it's very clearly like a harbor. But I don't know, something for some reason I always thought they were like up high. But we cut to this little harbor section down by the water, and there is a very disheveled millionaire who comes drunkenly like stumbling in, and he seems very upset. And he's got a rope and he's got a giant rock. And he ties the rope around his neck and he picks up the rock. And as he does, the tramp comes waddling down the steps and he just like stares at him. And the tramp just doesn't really clock into what's happening. He just, tips his hat and sits down and like brushy. Again, these little mannerisms of like his little gentleman. He pulls out his dirty handkerchief and he like brushes off the bench that he's going to sleep on for the night. And then he like sits down and he starts settling in, and the millionaire, it's like, I don't care, I'm going to do it. So he starts tying the rope around the rock. And at this point, the tramp starts like clocking what's happening and immediately like jumps up and steps in front of the guy and stops him. And, he makes some broad monologue we don't hear all of, but like the title card says like, the birds will sing tomorrow. And he's trying to like appeal to this guy's sense of humanity. And then he tells him to buck up a little bit. He's like, be brave, face life. And the guy starts to cry and he drops the rock on his foot and he does, the whole silent ow, 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 holding the foot. But eventually the millionaire decides, no, I'm going to go through with it. And Chaplin's trying to talk him out of it. And he's standing right next to him as he does this. And the millionaire has way too big of a loop. And he gets Chaplin as well as himself. And his head ducks out by accident. He throws the rock. And Chaplin just goes, yoink.
It was so good. It's really funny.
It's really funny. He just gets, woof, straight off the dock into the water.
And every bit after this, during this scene of like getting bumped into the water by accident, just really funny stuff.
Really funny stuff.
Really funny, just the physicality and just the gag of like continuously accidentally.
They just can't get out.
They can't get out. It's really good.
It's really good. So they bumble around for a little while, and then eventually they both get out. And the millionaire says, "You've saved my life. Like, we're friends forever now." And Chaplin's like, "Okay, cool." And he's like, "Let me take you home. Like, we're gonna fix you up." And so they leave together and they go back to the millionaire's mansion, where his very sober butler is there, and he does not like Chaplin at all.
No, because he's like, he's a tramp.
Yeah, he's like, what is this bum doing in our fancy house? But the millionaire, when he's drunk, is very jovial and very whatever. And when we get to the house, you discover that he makes some comment to the butler of, he's like, "Have you heard any word from my wife?" And he said, she just that she's sending a car for the rest of her belongings. Yeah. So you establish, that's why this guy is sad. That's why he is trying to commit self-harm. Like, that's where he's at with all of this. Right. And he gets sad for a minute, and then I think in this same scene, he gets sad, and then he grabs the gun from the desk drawer, and he's going to shoot himself, and Chaplin wrestles the gun for a minute, goes off, and they both freak out for a minute. Yeah. And then the millionaire's like, "No, I'm going to embrace life. Like, life is to be lived to the fullest. Let's go party." And so they just go partying at like 1 a.m. presumably. And they go out to a dance club with, again, lots of really good little bits strewn throughout. There is a bunch of streamers being thrown around, and the tramp is eating a plate full of spaghetti.
Oh my God. That's it was so funny.
It's really good.
And he eats it for so long.
He eats it for so long, and then he like stands up and follows it upwards.
It up, and it's so good.
It's really great. And then I might be mixing these. No, I think this is all the same scene. Correct me if I'm wrong. They go to a different party at somebody's house just following this.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think it's just like an extended montage of them going to places. They go to a house party. A bunch of people are there, and it's I can't mention every gag in the movie because there's lots of gags, but this one is funny to me, where a butler brings around like a tray of what I assume is like cheese or dip or something, and it's round and it's got like leaves around the edge, so it's like a star pattern or whatever. And Chaplin's like, no, I don't want any. And then the guy takes it away, and then somebody leans back against the chair who is bald and has a hat that looks exactly like the fig leaf thing. And Chaplin gets a spoon and a knife, and he's like, I actually might want some. He starts like trying to take stuff off of this guy's bald head, and the dude's like, what the hell, what are you doing? And then the butler comes back around when Chaplin looks away, and he's like, no, I don't want any. There's just lots of really good little gags.
Yeah. One of my favorites is in this montage is when they're driving, and Chaplin is like, he says like, "Hey, can you like drive more carefully?" And the millionaire just says, "Am I driving?
Am I driving?"
it's just really funny.
It's really good.
Chaplin has to like take the wheel. That was so, and again, like, it's just really funny.
Yep. Just good stuff all around. So they come back. After a night of partying, Chaplin gets the millionaire home safe, and he helps him inside. And the butler kicks him out and says like, "No, you can't come in." And so he leaves.
Well, the millionaire says you can take the car, right?
Right. Yeah. He's like, "I like your car," and he's like, "It's yours. Take it.
Have it." Yeah.
And so Chaplin's like, "Okay."
Okay. Yeah.
So he takes the car, and then I think. Is this, he spots the flower girl.
Yes.
And like rushes in. He's like, "I need money. You got money? Like, let's buy a bunch of flowers." And so the millionaire gives him a bunch of money because he's still drunk. And he goes and buys a bunch of flowers from her and continues his pretense of being rich.
Right, because he has the nice car and he has the money.
Mm-hmm. I might have missed, somewhere in there we might have cut to the flower girl's home life with her grandmother or whatever.
I think so. Yeah.
Just establishing that they're
whatever.
They're poor and and just that she she feels very lonely. Like her neighbor gets called on by a suitor, and we see that she's like, oh, I wish that was me. Yeah. Is thinking about Chaplin, all this stuff. Chaplin buys a bunch of flowers. He brings them inside. At this point, the millionaire has sobered up, and the gag is that when he's sober, he doesn't remember anything about when he's drunk.
Yeah.
So he doesn't know who Chaplin is.
Yeah.
And he's like, what are you doing? Get out of my house. Like, give me my car. Like,
yeah.
And so Chaplin is once again like nonplus, and he's kind of stuck. But he continues to go and do what he can, because when he's talking to the flower girl, he knows that like he starts visiting her, and at a certain point, there's a notice that's left, and it was my literal letterboxd review. There's a notice that the grandma gets that says, "You are due to pay $22 in rent. If you do not pay by tomorrow, then you are evicted." Yeah, which is $440 in today's money, I think.
Yeah, so even then, because obviously we can be like, God, $22. It's like, well, maybe at the time.
Maybe at the time.
It's probably equivalent today. No.
No.
Today, that would be equivalent to $440.
Yeah, and like...
I'm paying way more than that.
Yeah, I'm also paying way more than that for a space that is smaller than the space that is shown on screen. Anyway, getting that aside. Chaplin finds the notice when he's going and visiting the flower girl and reads it to her, and she gets very upset. And he's like, well, I'm going to help. But he also, in either that same scene or a scene before, a lot of these scenes are similar. I'm sorry that I might be getting like the timeline slightly mixed up. We're hitting the beats, but at a certain point, he's reading the newspaper to her, and there's an article about a doctor from Vienna who can cure blindness.
Yes.
And she's like, oh, how wonderful that would be. Like, that would be amazing. And he takes it on himself. He's like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this for you. I'm gonna help. So he gets a job as a street sweeper, which is kind of another funny little bit where he is walking back and forth and getting more and more frustrated as he sees like horses come by.
Yes.
Because he's like, I just cleaned the street. Like, I don't need shit all over the street again. And it ends with this really great button of just an elephant walking down and him just like hands on the hips, just absolutely fed up. But he's doing what he has to do, right? Yeah. Finds out they're going to get evicted. And he's like, okay, I'm going to work even extra harder. He goes back to his street sweeping job, and the foreman's like, you've been late too many times. Yeah. Like, you're done. You're out. And he's really upset because he's like, I need to help these people. Like, I need money by tomorrow. Yeah. And right across the way is a boxing house, and one of the boxers is standing, and he sees this all go down, and he grabs Chaplin and he says, hey, you want to make some quick money? And so he basically works it out with him. He's like, all right, we're going to throw the fight. Like, you're going to lose. We'll split it 50-50. Just don't let the boss know. Like, obviously, like, we can't be cheating, but... Right. So Chaplin is like, okay, you're not going to hurt me though, right? And he's like, no, I'm not going to hurt you. Like, just we'll throw a few punches. You go down, like, make it look real. It'll be fine. Yeah. As they're getting ready for the match, this guy who pulled him in gets a telegram that just says, like, the cops are looking for you. Get out of town. Yeah. And so he just books it. He leaves, and Chaplin is like, where are you going? Like, what's happening? He's like, I don't care about you. I got to go. And he leaves, and the boss who runs the boxing matches is like, well, I need a boxer. And he grabs some random guy out of the hallway. He's like, you're big, you're burly. You want to make like a quick $50, which adjusted for inflation is like $1,000. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, sure. That's, yeah. And so freelance, baby. And so the guy comes in, and he's huge. He's just this bulking brute of a guy. And Chaplin, again, it's something that's so funny to me about like his mannerisms, not because the mannerisms themselves are like inherently funny or something to be made fun of, but like the way he plays them and people's reaction to them are so entertaining. He's very effeminate. He's very flighty a lot of the time, but especially here when he's really nervous, he's just like, raising his shoulders and, cocking the head and crossing his legs and just like begging this guy for mercy, basically, and being like, hey, we can be friends, right? And the guy is very, doesn't know what to make of this guy. And so he leans over, he's like, hey, he's like, don't tell anybody. He's like, let's throw the fight. We'll split it. And the guy's like, no, winner takes all. Like, I'm going to beat you to a pulp, basically. Yeah. And Chaplin's a little nervous about that. Boxers from the last match come in, and one of them gets in a fight with the big guy, and the big guy just clocks him and knocks him straight out. And Chaplin immediately is like petrified. He's like, oh my God, like I'm going to die. So they go into the boxing match, and again, just really good physical comedy. Like it's really, you can tell how much they rehearsed this.
Oh,
like
yeah.
It's so in sync because the fight starts and Chaplin is perfectly behind the referee.
Yes.
And like bouncing and following his moves. So the ref is between him and his opponent, and they keep moving and keep moving. And every time his opponent moves the ref out of the way, Chaplin like gets a quick jab in, and then they keep doing it and keep doing it. And this whole thing is just full of really great gags at a certain point.
The bell rope wrapped around his neck. Also, just that every time, like when the bell rings, they like take a break, and then the minute the bell rings again, they get back to fighting.
They get back up.
And so when the rope is tied around Chaplin's neck, and so when he moves too far away from it, it rings the bell.
Yeah, if he gets hit, he goes down, it rings the bell, they go back to their corners.
He
He walks to his corner, it rings again, and they're back at it again.
And just the quickness, that jump between is really great.
It's
but
really,
that's
really
a really good gag. I loved also them going, like, being, like, counted out as one of them's on the ground and the other one's up. And then the minute the other one gets up, the other one goes down.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. And it's a really well-paced fight because there is a part of you that thinks he's going to win.
Yeah.
Like, you get to the point where he's like, oh, he's getting some hits and the guy's going down. Like, he might just win by dumb luck, but he doesn't.
No.
He loses. He doesn't get the money, and we are all very disappointed by that. And it's like, oh no, like that sucks. That's gutting. And he doesn't know what to do and encounters the millionaire drunk again. And this time he's like, hey, I need money. Like I need money. There's this person I need help. Like just, and he gives it to him. He's like, oh yeah, sure. Just take the money or whatever. In the middle of that, there is a burglary that happens.
Yeah.
And he almost gets robbed, and the burglars get away, but one of them hits the millionaire over the head as they leave. And when the cops show up, Chaplin's just there with a bunch of money this guy gave him, and the guy doesn't remember who he is.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, he's the burglar.
Right.
Chaplin runs, he gets away, and he runs straight to the blind girl, and he gives her all this money. He's like, this is for your eyes, this is for the rent, like you're gonna be okay, it'll be fine. And he tells her, he doesn't have the heart to tell her who he is. Yeah. Again, this whole time she still thinks he's a millionaire. But he just says, I'm going to be going away for a little while.
Yeah.
But like, we'll see each other is kind of the idea. But, she's very heartbroken that he's leaving and all these things. And so that happens. And then does the title card give any sort of, I can't remember, does it give like a timeline of this?
It's like 9 months later.
Something like that.
Maybe
yeah,
like
it's a good chunk of time.
Yeah, it's a good month.
Yeah, that he's been just in jail for robbing. And then we cut back, and he is in worse shape than he's been the entire movie. Like he was kind of like a little rugged before. Yeah. But now, like, he doesn't have a shirt. It's just his coat buttoned up. His pants are frayed and falling apart. A gag at the beginning of the movie I forgot to mention that comes back here is he's constantly being pestered by like newsboys. Yeah. Like they just think it's funny to mock him and to make fun of him and berate him. Yeah. And these newsboys are again harassing him. And it just so happens that, well, he goes to the corner that the flower girl used to be on, where they first met, and she's not there. Yeah. He's like, well, I don't know where she is. I don't know what happened. It's a big city. Gets harassed by these newsboys, and it just so happens to be on the corner of the flower girl's flower shop. She has an entire shop to herself now, and she's wearing much nicer clothes, and her grandma looks so much better, and she can see now. She got the surgery, and her sight is returned, and she's watching all this happen, and before this, you see a very rich gentleman come in, and she like straightens up and is like, oh, is it him? Like, and you can, implying that she's been doing this every time somebody well off comes in, trying to figure out like, oh, is this my mysterious benefactor? Is this the guy who was so kind to me? And then they never recognize her or say anything. She's like, nope, I guess not. Yeah. She sees Chaplin getting harassed and is kind of laughing a little bit at his misfortune or whatever. And he sulks by the window and he stops and he looks at her and like instantly, like he's like, oh, it's her. Yeah. And she kind of stares at him for a minute and starts to laugh, and she turns to her grandma. She's like, oh, I've made a conquest. Yeah. Like, oh, this poor little fool's fallen in love with me. And she offers him a flower because the one that he has is like falling apart. Yeah. Because he leaned down to pick it up. And he doesn't even register. He's just like so happy to see her. And at a certain point, she's like, no, no, no. And she grabs a coin from the drawer and she's like, look, I'll give you money and the flower. Like, you need that. And he gets really embarrassed and he goes to leave. And she stops and is like, no, 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 please, please. Like, please take this. And I'm getting a little teary talking about it. It's really lovely. Like, she hands him the coin and the flower and she stops. And there's this close up of like her touching his hand and feeling him, because she's been doing that the whole movie. There's a lot of like hand clasping between the two of them and her touching his face and his shoulder, and like, because that's how she's seeing the world at the time. And she just stops because she recognizes him, and she reaches up his arm and like, kind of gasps for a second, and she's like, you? And he just kind of nods his head and smiles sheepishly. He points his eyes like, you can see now? And she said, yes, I can see now.
And then
they just
the
stare
final
at each
shot
other.
Is his face.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking happy as ever.
Happy as ever. And
that's the end.
That's the end. It's a really lovely moment. I don't know. I think they're both acting the hell out of it.
Oh, totally. And I think even Chaplin has said like that's his finest shot that he ever got.
Yeah.
It's like that like final reaction.
There's something magical about it. Like there's this like subtle like laugh he does as he's like sitting there and he's all smiles, but like his eyes are tearing up. Like, it's just a really powerful, like, again, talking about the full power of like filmmaking and cinema. Yeah. Something about the close up is so intense.
Totally.
Especially in like films that are shot in 4:3, because it just fills the whole space, and just like, I don't know, there's just something magical about that last shot.
Absolutely.
That I cannot put into words.
Yeah. So stop trying.
Stop trying.
This should be a silent podcast. Maybe then we'd be able to convey our thoughts more ergonomically.
But yeah, that's the movie. Not nearly as long of a wrap up as some of these others have, just because there's a lot more like dialogue and plot in other movies that we've covered. But this is very simple. It's a series of scenes put together. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think this is, because later Chaplin movies after this, like kind of demarcated by The Great Dictator onward, he starts to realize, like, I call it the MASH effect, where you start with comedy and comedy gets you in the door, but what gives you staying power is like how you handle drama. And like the TV show MASH does that incredibly well, like basically invented the dramedy as like a TV series. Right. But Chaplin is so slapstick and so comedic. And there's these underlying tones of sincerity, and this one is very strong that way. But like from this onward, he starts to get very interested in like bigger ideas he can talk about as a filmmaker. Like The Great Dictator is, I think we'll have to cover it next year at some point, because it is a wild historical artifact of somebody who, of a contemporary of Hitler, who gets compared to Hitler because of the way he looks and just like the mustache. Yeah. Rather than leaning away from that, steers directly into the skid when it is very dangerous for him to do so. Like physically dangerous for him to be doing this, but he does. And like that point onward in his filmography, like there's a lot more seriousness. Like his last film is basically, he's playing a self-insert. He's playing a character who used to be famous in vaudeville and has lost his audience.
Is that Limelight? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. I'm really interested in that as well.
It's really, I like Limelight a lot, but like the reason I bring it up is because this feels like a good demarcation of like, it's the best of both worlds. Sure. I think you get the early Chaplin comedic timing, slapstick comedy, and you also get more of his like aching sincerity and his bigger ideas and his heart. And I think this is just a perfect like amalgamation of those two kind of pieces of his career when you look at it in the broad, big picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Good movie.
I have nothing to contribute to that.
That's fair.
But I agree. That sounds very,
Yeah. So, I don't know. I just think I like this movie a lot, and I think that it speaks to my sentimental sensibilities, because I'm a huge sentimentalist. And so like, it's not saying something politically relevant like The Great Dictator or Modern Times is, but I do think there's just like an aching, beating heart at the center of all of this, surrounded on all sides by some of the best comedy work of his career.
For sure.
Which I just think is cool.
Yeah. And so now, Parker, I don't know. Suddenly it's felt a lot more like I'm asking your opinion, and I'm not. I'm
Ah,
still
yes.
involved in this. But Parker, as someone who's so knowledgeable on all of this, or at least knowledgeable enough to talk about it, unlike me, who's like, yeah, it's good. I have no context for this in his career.
Sure.
But I think it's time to talk Citizen Kane.
I think so.
This movie has made the AFI a few times, the Sight and Sound, the BFI a few times. It is widely considered one of the greatest films of all time. I don't know where it currently sits on AFI compared to...
I'm not sure.
Well, would it be AFI? I think it would.
I think so.
Not. Hang on.
Pause, everyone.
I know earlier I said I'd put the work into this. I didn't.
But no, you didn't put any work into this. I should have known.
Oh.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, do let me know what you find, because I'm curious. Because I know for a fact it was on the list. I don't know if it is anymore.
Right.
But it was at a certain time. Let's see here.
Well, does it count as an American film? Yeah, it does. Of course it does.
Yeah.
It's currently at 11.
Okay.
The 11th.
Yeah.
Between The Searchers and The Wizard of Oz.
Gotcha.
So
fairly high.
Yeah, whereas Citizen Kane is still at number 1 of the 100 greatest American films of all time.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of its context. And this is what? 11 years before Kane? Because Kane's 42?
Yeah. I think so.
Wow, you sounded confident.
Well,
41, excuse me, it's 10 years.
It's 10 years. I wanted to say 41. I was like, I'm always wrong.
No, you're right. Wrong. It's 41, yeah. So 10 years, exactly 10 years before.
Exactly 10 years before.
Which, we'll talk about this a little bit, I think, with like the historical criteria. But kind of wild to look at like that 10-year gap of filmmaking. To go from this to Citizen Kane. When like, years. if you try to compare something from like 2011 to 2021, like they're not going to be that different, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then you think, like, again, we're just throwing this out there. We haven't talked about the movie yet.
Sure.
But, City Lights in 1931, Citizen Kane in 1941, Singing in the Rain in 1952.
Yeah.
An insane 2 decades for film.
Pretty wild stuff.
With Singing in the Rain obviously being about kind of that City Lights.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, like just, that 10 years between City Lights and Citizen Kane is obviously a huge decade for film history.
It's kind of wild to think about.
Yeah, it is. And let's think about it in silence for just a little bit longer. Everyone take a second.
Everybody just, a moment of silence.
Sit in that for a minute. Think about that 10 years. Anyway,
criteria then?
Yeah, let's do it. Historical and cultural relevance.
Okay.
I think, once again, these movies that are before Citizen Kane are tricky in that they are so long ago that they definitely shaped film, but we might not be seeing it as much.
Right.
Days,
so,
right?
Yeah. This one's interesting, though, because it's kind of what we were... Hear me out. Okay. It's kind of what we were running into with Puss in Boots, where we're like, oh, there's interesting stuff going on. Hear me out. There's interesting stuff going on a technical level for animation, but like that really kind of goes to Spider-Verse, right? Like if we're making that pull. And I feel the same way about this, where I'm like, I mean, more people on the street are going to recognize who Charlie Chaplin is than Citizen Kane. But does this film have enough of like the iconography, or does that come from other places?
Right. Like, again, Chaplin himself, I would argue his career as a whole might be more historically and culturally significant than just Citizen Kane.
Right. Cause it's not like this film is the one that introduces the Tramp character.
No.
Like if you had that poll, maybe you could make a stronger argument of like, oh no, this is where an icon begins.
Right. But you could say that this film if you consider it the peak of the Tramp character and of Chaplin's silent era. And if you consider it coming out in the sound era and still holding its own.
Right.
You could argue that this, I don't know.
Well, no, that's a good point, because what I'm looking up right now, because I think I might be right on this, but I don't actually know, and I don't want to make a poll if I'm not right. But I think this might be his last appearance as the Tramp. I think he might retire, like, for all intents and purposes, he kind of retires the character after this. There's a version of him that exists in Great Dictator, because he plays two parts in that. He plays the Hitler character, and he plays a Jewish barber who looks like the Tramp. But he's always been very adamant in his writing and in interviews that he's like, the Tramp never speaks. The Tramp as a character cannot be vocal, and he talks in The Great Dictator. And so you could make the argument of like, well, that's not the same character he's been playing. Right. So I want to see if there's anything after this. Okay, Modern Times is after this, which is still the Tramp character, I think.
Okay, so, and I would say that Modern Times is significant enough that I wouldn't say this cements the legacy.
Right.
I mean,
no, I would agree.
Which of those two films shows up in the 2019 classic Joker? It's Modern Times.
It's Modern Times. Oh man. But yeah,
anyway,
but it's close though, because it goes City Lights, Modern Times, and Great Dictator.
Right.
And Great Dictator is the demarcation line of, okay, it's over, we're doing talkies, and this is the character.
Here's my argument, because this is what I can speak to.
Sure.
Because I've seen Modern Times. That's the movie they showed me in film school.
Okay.
To introduce me to the Tramp and to introduce me to Chaplin. Obviously, that might not be the case in every film school.
Sure.
But in my personal experience, I think that, and also just historical relevance, Modern Times, like you were talking about, has more of the big idea kind of social commentary. Right. And obviously, there are other ones. And there's a bit of that in this, too. Yeah. I don't know. Obviously, City Lights might be a lot of people's favorites, or like favorite of these. But I think I'm giving the point to Citizen Kane, just because I don't think I can say that City Lights cements the legacy of the Tramp, nor introduces the character.
Sure.
So, I don't know. That's where I'm at. What do you think?
I can get behind that. I think that's fair. I think
and
that
Citizen Kane is Citizen Kane.
And Citizen Kane is Citizen Kane.
Right. Citizen Kane of films.
Oh my god. How well is this movie doing what it's trying to do?
Very well.
Yeah?
Well, I'm going to let you speak on that point. Because mine is very much tied into the third criteria for me.
Yeah. I think it's doing very well what it's trying to do. Again, that mixing of sentimentality and comedy. I think it is equal parts a comedy film and a love story. And it feels like the pacing is such that it feels 50-50 between those two storylines of, here's all the comedy stuff with the millionaire, and then here are the quieter scenes with the blind girl, which still have like good comedy bits. Especially one last quick gag shout out, which is she's asking him to hold the yarn so she can make it into a ball, and she grabs a thread off of his shirt, and he's too polite to say anything, and so she just pulls the entirety of his shirt out without realizing it. It's a good bit.
It's a good bit. Really funny. Yeah.
So I think it is doing very, very well what it's trying to do. I do think it's weird because like I was noticing myself this time around. It's still like a brisk like 86 minutes or something like that. Yeah. But there was still a little bit in the middle that I kind of found myself checking out slightly.
I agree. I felt that kind of the drag a little bit in the middle.
Yeah, so like it's not flawless in that regard. Like it doesn't keep things moving as well as maybe it could, but that kind of starts bleeding over into my third criteria because I'm like, well, do I like cuz I feel that way a lot during Citizen Kane, where I'm just like, okay, yeah, all right, cool.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
But we're not. Let's just say City Lights alone, not comparing it to what our experience of Citizen Kane is.
Okay.
Real quick, City Lights. What is it trying to do? It's trying to be funny. It's trying to communicate like that sentimentality and the relationship and the feeling that the Tramp has for the blind flower girl. And what else? I don't know. I mean, again,
I think that's it. Like, I think that's what it's
a very subjective thing to be like, what is a film communicating?
Right.
Well, I don't know. Everyone's gonna.
And I think kind of blurring the lines a little bit between some of these criteria, I think another thing that it's trying to do is keep the Tramp relevant in a society of talking pictures, which I think it does well. Like, and I watched a little documentary about it in prep, and like they were talking about how it was very well received when it came out. Like, he was really nervous that people were going to turn away because it was still a silent film.
Right.
And they still came out in droves and still loved the film. And so I think that was like, as far as something he was trying to engineer from the ground up, like I think it's successful in that regard as well.
You can't say for Citizen Kane.
No.
People didn't love Citizen Kane.
People did not love Citizen Kane when it came out. For the sake of brevity, I'm just gonna say let's give it to City Lights.
Okay,
go
great.
1-1.
Okay.
You good with that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Cool. Okay.
All right.
Criteria.
What were you gonna say about this? Because you said you had thoughts.
Again, it's my thing. It's just my weird little thing where I don't apparently really sentimental grand romance films from the past don't work for me.
Sure.
So for this, I laughed quite a lot. I had a good time. I see what it's doing, and I think it does it well. I did not shed a tear.
Okay.
However, I did feel nice at the end.
Okay. That's fair.
So there you go.
There you go.
How did you feel? How does this movie work on you?
I think it works fairly well. I think I didn't shed a tear, but I did get a little choked at the end.
Yeah.
Just that lump in the throat, but didn't cry, didn't tear up. I laughed a lot. I laughed a lot more than because it's probably been, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 years since I've revisited this. It's been a minute. Or maybe was it sooner? I don't know. I'd have to check Letterboxd. Maybe it was sometime in the last 3. But I was surprised at how many of the gags landed for me. Because sometimes you watch silent films and silent comedies and a lot of the humor doesn't work.
Sure.
It's either aged or doesn't read, and it isn't quite landing. And I feel like a lot of this did. So as a comedy, I think it's working really well. I think I don't really care about the romance between the two. If that makes sense.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of chemistry there, but what I am drawn to is the inherent sense of humanity of people looking out for each other. That's what gets me at the end, is just two human beings connecting because of a kind act. That's what I'm invested in, rather than oh, they're in love,
Yeah.
So that's my thought on that.
Okay. So does it make you, how do we word it? How do we word the criteria?
This was personal, do you connect with it on a personal level?
Are you connecting with it on a personal level? So I imagine you do connect with this more than you
I think so. Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
But it's again, one of those of kind of splitting hairs a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas so many of the other ones we've especially in recent ones, are so cut and dry. I would much rather watch Lilo and Stitch any day before I'm gonna sit down and pop in Kane.
Yeah.
But I'm also not ever chomping at the bit to be man, I really want to watch City Lights right now,
Right. I feel like I would reasonably watch these at a similar rate, or a similar I can't think of the word, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's splitting hairs. But I think I fall more that this is more my kind of movie than Citizen Kane is.
Right, and that's where I'm at too. This is still more my kind of movie than Citizen Kane.
Okay, so
I think I am gonna say.
Yeah. Okay.
You take it this time.
So our subjective ruling would be that City Lights is better than Citizen Kane. Do we need to take a step back and ask the big question again, like we do have to do sometimes?
I think it could be.
I think it might be.
It's
splitting
close.
hairs. It's close. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Is I could see it going either way.
Right.
Honestly, because this is one of those that has like what I've discovered over the last like 6 months of doing this is that like where it usually lands for me in the broad question is kind of like two pieces where it's like, okay, is it just a damn good movie? Like, is it well made? In the same way that like we landed with Puss in Boots being like, I object, like I can strongly say I think this is better because I think it is a better crafted story and a better crafted film.
Right.
Even if it doesn't have like a historical significance. Or it has to be something that's so much of a juggernaut. Like, aside from Jaws being a really good movie that I like a lot, it also is such a huge moment in film history that also like gives it that objective view of like, no, this is better than Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
So this one is like an even split between those.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I think artistically and creatively they are about on par with each other in how they're doing what they're doing. Because again, even like, it's not as flashy or as pioneering as Citizen Kane is, but like Chaplin is still on the cutting edge of like film language.
Oh, yeah.
Of like the grammar of film, of, you know, the Kuleshov effect of like implying what somebody is looking at by cutting to another shot. And like, there's dissolves in this movie. Like in the middle of the boxing match, he gets hit so hard that he thinks his trainer in the corner is like the blind girl. And he starts like kissing her hand. Like he's playing around with things that are brand new for the time. And he is paving the way.
Right.
So like they feel on par with each other on that regard. And then in like a historical context, it's like, yeah, it's a Charlie Chaplin movie and it's one of his best. And Citizen Kane is Citizen Kane. So it is, it's such a coin toss, I think.
It is. But I think I am going to say City Lights can go above.
Okay. I think I can land on that as well.
On the objective, not the objective, just like that.
Yes.
Better than the official better than Citizen Kane canon. It can go above it on the list, I think.
I can get behind that.
Okay. You say it. You say the final sentence, the verdict.
City Lights is better than Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
You heard it here first, folks.
You heard it here first. No one's ever said that.
No one's ever said
There's
that.
no way to know.
There's no way to know.
Well,
anyway,
great.
That was a good one. That was
I'm
fun.
super excited for the next episode.
Oh my god.
Because everybody, if you don't know, this podcast is part of the Aud Brothers podcast division.
Yes.
If you will. And our sister podcast is Mind Over Mattel, where our friends Will and Rio are they're going to come back.
Yep.
At some point. They are going through every.
They were traipsing through Europe for a while, but they're back now.
But they're back now. They're done with their little dream trip, and they're back to the dream house, if you will.
Yes, they're back to the dream house.
So they're going through every Barbie movie, and we thought, what better way to do our first full crossover between the podcasts than to ask the question: is Greta Gerwig's Barbie 2023 better than Citizen Kane? And we don't know. We
got some guest stars. We
have
got
some
Will
guest
and Rio
stars.
coming in.
Will and Rio coming in.
Gonna be so much fun, you guys.
It's gonna be really fun.
I genuinely cannot wait. It's gonna be a blast.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I'm very excited.
We're on the cutting edge of cinema history right now.
Absolutely.
Great.
Well, look forward to that in a couple weeks. That'll be really fun. Well, thank you as always, everybody, for tuning in. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.